A season of second chances. Chapter 1. A fresh start. The first day of autumn in Maplewood was always magical. Crisp air, leaves turning shades of amber and gold, and a sense of renewal swept over the small town. Emma Davis stood on her front porch, sipping her coffee and watching the leaves dance in the wind. She loved this time of year, especially after a summer that had been nothing but overwhelming. Today, though, felt different. It wasn't just the change of season, but a stirring inside her, as if life was offering her something more. 35, Emma was starting over. It had been a year since her divorce from Mark, and in that time she'd moved back to Maplewood, the town where she grew up. After years of city life, she had missed the simplicity of small-town living, where everyone knew your name and there was comfort in the familiar. The last 12 months had been filled with quiet moments of self-reflection, but the loneliness sometimes weighed heavy on her heart. Running a hand through her long chestnut brown hair, Emma took a deep breath. She wasn't one to wallow in sadness for long. Moving back had been the first step toward healing, and today, she felt ready for the next phase of her life, even if she wasn't sure what that looked like yet. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was her best friend, Sophie, with her usual enthusiastic greeting. "Coffee at the Willow Cafe in 20? I have the best news." Emma smiled. Sophie was the kind of friend everyone needed. The one who knew how to pull you out of your funk and remind you that life was full of possibilities. Emma grabbed her bag and keys, eager to catch up and hear about Sophie's latest adventure. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Reunion. The Willow Cafe was a cozy spot nestled between Maplewood's bookshop and an antique store. Emma had spent countless hours there as a teenager, journaling, dreaming, and planning her future. As she pushed open the door, the scent of freshly baked muffins and rich coffee filled her senses, bringing her back to a simpler time. Sophie was already at their usual table by the window, waving excitedly. Her blonde curls bounced as she stood to hug Emma, nearly knocking over her iced latte in the process. "You're not going to believe this," Sophie said, her blue eyes sparkling with excitement. "Guess who's back in town?" Emma laughed, shaking her head. "Who?" Before Sophie could respond, a deep, familiar voice spoke from behind Emma. "Long time no see." She turned to find herself face to face with Nick Sullivan. The boy who had once been her high school sweetheart was now a man, and a handsome one at that. His brown hair was slightly tousled, and his hazel eyes still had that mischievous gleam she remembered so well. He was taller, broader, and there was a ruggedness about him that made Emma's heart skip a beat. "Nick," she managed, feeling a rush of old emotion she hadn't expected. "Wow, I didn't know you were back." Nick smiled, that lopsided grin she used to love. "Just got in a few days ago. Thought I'd stop by the cafe, see if it still had the best coffee in town." The air between them was thick with memories, both good and bittersweet. Emma hadn't seen Nick since they went their separate ways after high school. He'd left Maplewood for college and she had stayed, thinking they'd make the long-distance thing work. But life had other plans and their paths diverged. "Are you back for good?" Emma asked, trying to steady her voice. Nick nodded. "I am. Took over my dad's construction business after he retired. So, looks like I'm here to stay." Sophie, ever the matchmaker, glanced between them with a grin. "I'll leave you two to catch up," she said, winking at Emma before gathering her things and making a quick exit. For a moment, neither Emma nor Nick said anything. The years that had passed between them hung in the air like an invisible barrier, but beneath it was the familiarity of two people who had once shared everything. "Can I sit?" Nick asked, gesturing to the chair Sophie had vacated. "Of course," Emma replied, her heart beating a little faster than she would have liked. Chapter 3. Old Flames, New Sparks. They talked for over an hour, catching up on the years that had slipped away. Nick told Emma about his travels, how he'd lived in a dozen different places, but none ever felt like home. He had been in serious relationships, but nothing stuck. And Emma shared the story of her marriage, how things with Mark had started well, but slowly unraveled as their lives grew apart. They had no children, which made the divorce clean but emotionally draining. "It's funny," Nick said, stirring his coffee. "You can go all over the world, see incredible places, meet new people, but at the end of the day, home is where your heart is. And for me, that's always been here." Emma smiled, understanding the sentiment more than he knew. She had come back for the same reason. Maplewood was where she felt grounded. And now, with Nick sitting across from her, it felt as though the universe was offering her a second chance at something she thought had been lost forever. As they spoke, the conversation turned toward their old memories, high school football games, late-night drives, and the time they got caught sneaking into the town's annual fall festival after hours. They laughed, the tension between them slowly melting away, replaced by the warmth of shared history. Nick's gaze lingered on her for a moment. "You haven't changed much, Emma." She raised an eyebrow, teasing. "You mean I look exactly like I did when I was 18? He chuckled. "No, you're even more beautiful now." The compliment caught her off guard, and she felt a blush creep up her cheeks. She hadn't felt this way in years, giddy, nervous, and hopeful all at once. But was it really possible to rekindle something after so much time had passed? As if reading her thoughts, Nick leaned forward, his voice gentle. "You ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't broken up?" The question hung in the air between them. Of course she'd wondered. There had been nights when she thought about what her life might have looked like if they had stayed together. But she also knew that who they were then and who they were now were two different people. "Sometimes," she admitted, her eyes meeting his. "But I also know we both needed to grow up. We needed to figure out who we were without each other." Nick nodded slowly. "Yeah, think you're right. But maybe we were meant to come back to this." Emma's heart skipped another beat. She wasn't sure if it was the nostalgia or the undeniable chemistry still simmering between them, but she felt something stir deep within her. Could they really have a second chance? "I guess we'll have to see," she said softly, leaving the possibility hanging between them like an unspoken promise. Chapter 4: Building Bridges. Over the next few weeks, Emma and Nick found themselves spending more and more time together. At first, it was casual, bumping into each other at the grocery store, running into each other at the park, where Nick was helping renovate the town's playground. But soon, casual coffee turned into long dinners, and before she knew it, Emma was falling for Nick all over again. But this time it was different. They weren't two teenagers navigating the throes of young love. They were adults who had lived, who had lost, and who had learned from their mistakes. One evening, Nick invited Emma to his place for dinner. He had bought a charming old house near the outskirts of town and was in the process of renovating it piece by piece. When Emma arrived, she was struck by how cozy and inviting it was, even with tools and construction materials scattered about. "This is incredible," she said as she stepped inside, admiring the wooden beams and open layout. "You've really made it your own." Nick smiled, handing her a glass of wine. "It's a work in progress. Kind of like me." They both laughed, but there was a truth to his words that resonated with Emma. She felt like she too was a work in progress, still figuring out what her life would look like after the divorce, after returning to Maplewood. And maybe, just maybe, Nick was part of that picture. After dinner, they sat by the fireplace, the warmth of the flames and the wine making the evening feel even more intimate. Nick leaned back in his chair, watching Emma as she spoke about her plans to start a small business in town. Something she had always dreamed of but never pursued during her marriage. "You should do it," Nick encouraged. "You've got the passion and the drive. Maplewood could use someone like you bringing fresh ideas into the community." Emma smiled, touched by his confidence in her. She hadn't realized how much she missed having someone believe in her dreams. Mark had always been practical, focusing on stability, but Nick had always supported her desire to chase her passions, no matter how uncertain. As the fire crackled, Nick moved closer, his hand gently brushing against hers. The simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through Emma, and she knew in that moment that her feelings for him were no longer just a rekindling of old emotions. This was something real, something new and full of potential. "I've missed this," Nick said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Missed what?" Emma asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "Being with you. Talking like this. Laughing. It feels like everything makes sense again." Emma looked into his eyes and saw the same vulnerability she felt inside. They had both been hurt, both gone through their own trials, but here they were, finding their way back to each other. Before she could respond, Nick leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a soft, tender kiss. It was the kind of kiss that held years of unspoken words, of longing and second chances. Emma's breath caught, and for the first time in a long time, she felt completely and utterly at peace. Chapter 5. A Love Renewed. The days grew shorter as autumn deepened, but Emma and Nick's connection only grew stronger. They spent their weekends exploring the surrounding countryside, going on hikes, and talking about their hopes for the future. Nick helped Emma lay the groundwork for her business, a boutique that would feature local artisans and handmade goods, and Emma, in turn, supported Nick as he expanded his construction company. As they rebuilt their lives, they also rebuilt their relationship brick by brick, ensuring that this time it was stronger than ever. They were no longer the starry-eyed teenagers who believed love could conquer all. They were wiser now, more patient, and more willing to put in the work it took to maintain a relationship. One crisp November morning, as they walked hand in hand through the town square, Nick stopped in front of the boutique Emma had been preparing to open. "I've been thinking," Nick said, his tone serious but soft. Emma raised an eyebrow, sensing there was something important he wanted to say. "About what?" Nick turned to face her, his hazel eyes full of emotion. "About us. About how far we've come. And about how much I love you." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Though they had danced around the idea of love for the past few months, this was the first time either of them had said it out loud. "I love you too," she whispered, tears prickling the corners of her eyes. Nick took her hands in his voice steady. "I don't want to waste any more time. We've already lost so many years. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Emma." And with that, he dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" Emma's breath caught in her throat as she looked down at the man who had once been her first love, and who was now, undeniably, her forever love. The ring sparkled in the autumn sunlight, but it was Nick's eyes that held her attention. Eyes full of love, hope, and the promise of a future together. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "1,000 times yes." Nick stood, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms for a kiss. The town square erupted in cheers as passers-by stopped to witness the moment, and Emma felt an overwhelming sense of joy wash over her. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Emma realized that life had a funny way of bringing things full circle. She had come back to Maplewood seeking a fresh start, and what she found was a love that had never truly faded, a love that, like the changing seasons, was renewed once again. Epilogue. Forever and always. The following spring, Emma and Nick were married in a small, intimate ceremony at the Maplewood Inn, surrounded by family and friends. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers, and the sun shone brightly on their special day. As they exchanged vows, Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. Life hadn't been easy, but every twist and turn had led her back to Nick, the one person who truly understood her, loved her, and supported her dreams. Their love story was one of second chances, of growing and learning, and of finding each other again when the time was right. And as they danced beneath the stars, Emma knew that this time, they were meant to last forever. Their hearts were no longer searching. They had found their way home.